Right, good evening to you all, and welcome to the Bath Royal Literary and Scientific Institution. My name is Joe Wilson. I happen to be the Vice Chair of the trustees here. But most importantly, with James, I am the co-organiser of the brilliantly engineered exhibition, which will take place here in 2 weeks' time. So this year for the exhibition, we decided to arrange 3 different talks on engineering in the weeks before the exhibition, and this is the first of those. And I shall introduce you to our speaker in a moment. But firstly, some housekeeping. There is no fire drill planned this evening, so if the alarm goes off, it's a fire, and you will need to calmly and quickly leave the building either through this door here down these stairs or through the far door in the corner there down the stairs into 18, out the building to the right and meet down at the green by the church around the corner. But hopefully that information is purely academic this evening. And then secondly, as usual, we'll take questions at the end of the talk rather than the beginning, and we'll need to use a microphone because we have some attendees online and they can't hear if we don't use the microphone. So if you're chosen to ask a question, we'll bring over a microphone and then speak carefully into that. So moving on to tonight's talk, then Peter Gradwell is our speaker this evening. He is the programme lead at One Word and the founder of Gradwell Communications. And with a lifelong fascination for communications technology, he studied software engineering at Aberystwyth before moving to Bath in 2002. And when he came here, he established Gradwell Communications, which has grown into a significant tech employer, providing telecom services to over 20,000 small businesses in the area. Peter earned his PhD in computer science from Bath in 2009. And then during the lockdown, the COVID lockdown, he pivoted his focus towards mobile technology and 5G, which we'll be covering in the talk today. He resides in Weston, so he's a local lad and commutes around the city daily. In fact, we're just discussing the benefits or not of driving in Bath rather than cycling. And he continues to innovate in the ever-evolving tech landscape, which is quite a feat at the moment, I would say. So over to Peter, your evening speaker.
So as I was leaving the house, my 7-year-old son said, I'm going to give a good talk. He said, why are you giving a talk? I said, well, I've done this project. He said, no. Why are you giving a talk in Bath? I was like, well, he said, you built the network in Cardiff. And I said, and that's the one that he's helped build, because he's been there with me. But this is the Western ORAN deployment, and it has a set of networks around Bath and Cardiff, and also up into Shropshire and things. So this talk hopefully has relevance to more than people, just the Bathonians here tonight. Yes, good spot from Jacob's point of view as to why on earth would anyone want to listen to me in Bath. So thank you very much for inviting me. It's very cool to be here and to be giving a talk on here. We gave an evening presentation in the Roman Baths, and some of you may remember that the Roman Baths was used as part of a 5G trial about 4 or 5 years ago. And that project was the start of this kind of government-funded R&D program into 5G and what the benefits would be. I will let you into a secret. That network didn't actually use any 5G mobile technology then. It was a kind of a Wi-Fi on steroids affair. But the network that we built in Bath and that I will explain about in Bath is very much a definite 5G network. Now, I would like to know a little bit about the audience, because I know that on the back row are some of my colleagues who know more about this network than I do. And I know that Tony here is quite good at software, but what about the people in the middle? Have anyone here kind of worked for a mobile network operator? Excellent. They're probably giving talks about mobile in Bath. All the BT people come from Bristol. So feel free if you want me to kind of dial it up or indeed dial it down. Let me know. And also, I would like to be rude a little bit later on about one network operator in particular. And it's helpful that if we do that, and they're not sat in the room. So I've been lucky enough to be part of the internet revolution and kind of 4 cycles of technology transformation. Sort of, through email and through telecoms and fixed line telecoms and broadband, and now they're moving to fiber, and now this kind of move into mobile. And the thing about all of those other technologies is that they all moved and they all started with 1 or 2 operators making decisions about how they built their network and where they built their network and what happens. And in all of those other scenarios, so the landline phone, there's now a plethora of mobile operators. In fact, we're now phasing out that one. In broadband, we've gone from 1 broadband provider to hundreds of broadband providers and 150 alternative networks building fiber. Mobile is still the network, or still the technology, where there are fundamentally 4, soon to be 3, operators who make decisions about what mobile networks go where and when and how and why. And the problem with that is that they put the networks where they think their customers are and where they think there's going to be high amounts of usage, which is typically teenagers in cities watching videos online. And that means that there's great parts of the country that don't have enough mobile phone coverage. So it's kind of that injustice that we wanted to explore at the heart of this project and see if we could, and see what the solutions are for doing it. But I'll just, as Joe's kindly already said, I'll just take you back to my happy place of Aberystwyth, sitting on the beach, thinking about tech. And then, as I mentioned, I came to Bath and did a PhD. And in April 2020, as we were all sat at home, I left the Gradwell business because it was a reasonable success for some private equity people. And then I started a mobile operator. And again, I went around talking to lots of people going, well, this is great, but all my customers want to know how can they get better signal. And that kind of got me involved in Telet and this one word, R&D. And what's known in the umbrella program as the Future Networks program. So the government, the previous government, anyway, via its department's DCMS, and then it became DSIT for Department of Science, Information Technology, or Innovation and Technology, has invested about £250 million over 3 competitions. They started off with rural connected communities, then they went into the OpenRAN competition, and then most recently this kind of open networks ecosystem program. And the focus has always been on 5G adoption and technology creation, and wondering, if we implement this, what will people use it for? There's been quite a lot of academic work, there's been quite a lot of public policy work, helping councils understand how they can do better. And Telet, we've been lucky enough to receive funding in each of these 3 phases, which has been great. Now, one of the challenges of government directly funded R&D work is they say it's policy-led, i.e. the minister cares about it. The downside of that is that ministers have really short attention spans, and so they make it all 18-month sprints, and then they faff around with the paperwork, so you have even less time than that. So it's incredibly tight. Just before we talk about the One Word programme, I did want to just mention the previous project, the Best of British project, and this was an 18-month programme to create, I won't read all the words out, but in particular a new radio, and actually I had a picture on the previous slide, down in the bottom corner here. This is called the Selectica M5Q. One of the challenges in the telecoms industry, and one of the reasons why they started the Future Networks programme, was that we basically had 3 mobile network vendors. We had Nokia, Ericsson and Huawei. The government obviously didn't want to have Huawei equipment in its critical national infrastructure, so it legislated to remove Huawei equipment. That led a duopoly, and the government doesn't like duopolies either. So they kind of had this dream, I think, harping back to the great days of Marconi and GEC, where there would be a field of British innovation and startup companies all making interesting equipment. And it's very hard to make a 5G radio. You need a lot of processing power, a lot of intellect. And it genuinely seems to be one of these areas where if you can write slightly better quality software, then you can make it go faster. But the first project was with a Cambridge manufacturer called Selectica and a Southampton University spin-out called Telecom, where we took their intellectual property in what is known as the upper phi, the physical layer, blended it into the Selectica radio, or at least we tried to, and ultimately we created a radio, an actual physical metal box that you can stick on a lamppost, and plugged it into our network. And that was one of the bits of foundation, and a very steep learning curve in how this stuff actually works down at the physical level, and a great basis then on which to say, how can we do something that's bigger and more deployment focused and more use case focused rather than kind of proper making metal boxes and learning all about circuit boards and things like that. So the One Word project was a big project, or still is a big project. It's a £14.5 million project. 10 million of that has come from the central government. £4.5 million went into the public sector, of which about 900k has gone into Bath and North East Somerset Council. The rest went into the other councils and the Lancaster University, and then it was matched by £4.5 million of commercial investment as well from these partners here. So Telet and IQ, as we've mentioned, Radisys, which is ultimately part of the Reliance Group in India, and then Virtusa Selexca, who made that radio I mentioned, and TVA, who's a new startup also making a new indoor radio rather than outdoor radio. So yeah, lots of companies here that are actually making new products supported through this R&D development. And our project scope is very tight, as you say, 15.5 months. We had 5 strands. So one was, we're going to do network build in 3 difficult places. So central Bath, central Cardiff, and Park in Shrewsbury. The second is, we're going to try multiple different technologies. And as part of this kind of great vision of the future of how UK telecoms could have its renaissance, the government focused on this standard called OpenRAN, and that meant that all the different people that made all the different boxes should be able to plug together and work seamlessly. Those of you with tech backgrounds will understand that if you take lots of vendors and stick them all together, they don't work seamlessly. But the point was to prove how well this would work. Each of the vendors I've mentioned had a product development sort of ambition of their own. So Antivia have made a new small cell product, and they've made it with a new silicon system on a chip, an actual chip that's been made in Bristol by a company called Picocom, now called RAN Semi. But, so we've got a British engineered chip inside a British engineered radio, sadly manufactured in Taiwan, but we'll fix that one day, I'm sure. And, and we've deployed it in the rugby ground and in Cardiff Market. Radisys have a layer of software that we'll talk about a bit more in a minute. And Selexca wanted to carry on making their product better as well. And then one of the big challenges, one of the reasons why we don't have very good mobile phone signal in Bath is there aren't that many good places to put big towers. We have a habit of vetoing all the planning applications anyway, because we don't like the look of them. And part of that whole conversation really is how should councils and public bodies work with telecoms operators in order to enable this infrastructure better. So we've had a whole set of public policy work going on, and in particular the West of England Combined Authority had a role where they were going to take some work they've already done and kind of use the learnings from this programme to say, what is the blueprint, what is the standard for the West of England, how should we adopt more telecoms stuff in the future? And then finally, a bit of an academic thread, because there's quite a lot of interesting questions around how can you save energy on mobile networks, can you power them down when they're not being used, what's the role of artificial intelligence in there? Now, the next important question, I think, is why does anyone need 5G? 5G, to my mind, sits at the quadrant of high speed, big area coverage. So if you have a small area and you want high speed like this room, then the cheap obvious thing to do is to get a Wi-Fi access point like they've got on the wall and put it in. That won't cost you very much money at all, and you'll get a great indoor speed. If you've got a small area and you want to do low speed, like maybe you've got some sensors in your house, or you want to count the number of sheep that you've got in a barn, or anything like that, then there's technology such as low energy Bluetooth or Zigbee. And if you've got a big area and you want to, like a country, and you want to cover it in low speed, then a public mobile cellular network is a great thing to use. A 4G network is really good for that. Or if you want low bandwidth, then you can use LoRaWAN, because that has really great propagation technologies. So 5G kind of has a use in the high speed, large area question. And private 5G means you then need to find people that have got applications that operate over a big area and need high amounts of bandwidth. And obviously it's more expensive than Wi-Fi, so there's this sort of continuum. Are people willing to invest? The reasons why they might want to spend money on that are they get dedicated spectrum, so they don't get interference. Probably in this room we could look and we'll see there's loads of other Wi-Fi networks. We'll probably find next door's Wi-Fi network. All the Wi-Fi networks do work together, but they ultimately degrade this level of service. They all balance out. With private 5G, you get your own spectrum, you get a license from Ofcom. You can have cellular features like handover and resiliency. It doesn't need line of sight. This is a big issue in the radio world. You can do very high-speed point-to-point links if you've got good line of sight, but many applications want to have mobility, or they want to walk around, or there won't be line of sight, but then it's more expensive. So that's really the reason why you would use 5G. And then to build a mobile network, you roughly need some SIM cards, some phone handsets, a bit of software called the mobile core network, and then the radio network, and that's A, software, and B, metal boxes that go on the side of lampposts. The other thing is just to think about different types of 5G core networks and 5G mobile networks. So I'm sure everyone in this room has got at least 3 phones in their pocket, and I'm sure that at least two of them will have 5G indicators on them. And the network that you're mainly using with the mobile network at the moment, if you're a customer of EE or Vodafone or O2 or 3, then that will fundamentally be a 4G mobile phone network, which is then giving you an extra speed boost with some 5G frequencies. What we've built here, I might come back to it in a minute, is what's known as a standalone 5G network. So there was an evolution of the standards. Everything was simplified, actually, and made it a bit easier to deploy. And so we are working in an environment called 5G New Radio. And so you end up with a different, well, and the point of this, and I guess the challenge of this, is that you therefore you have obviously different software in the core, you have different software in the radio, but then you need different software on the handsets. So one of the things that we've had to explore is how do we get people to use this network? What's the barrier to adoption? And one of the barriers is that people need fairly modern handsets. And one of the criticisms of this project, fairly valid, is that we spent a lot of money building a high-speed, high-spec network in a relatively rich part of the city, and you need a new phone to use it. Okay, so it's not very good for inclusion. Now, that's a fair criticism if you are looking for a project that's focused on inclusion. We're not. We're looking at a project that's focused on R&D outcomes to prove that it works, and it does deliver high speed in these areas. Okay, so, but you know, it's been an interesting challenge to ask the question, how do we get as many people as possible to use this network? And just going back to this one, I want to highlight the 3 very important acronyms, the CU, DU, and RU. So the RU is the metal box that goes on the lamppost. The CU and the DU, in our case, is this software that has been written by Radisys that sits on some servers in the Guildhall, and then the 5G core network is also there. So on the one hand, 5G standalone is simpler because there's less bits to it, there's less legacy to it, it operates faster, but it's also new and different. As I mentioned, handsets. Handsets have been a big challenge for us. You know, people's mobile phone. You might have seen that we've run a set of programs whereby kind of every 2 weeks you could come along to see us in Newark Works, and you could bring your mobile phone and we would see if we could connect it to the network. And like I said, quite a lot of people turn up with fairly old mobile phones that don't support this technology. And that's because 99% of the market focus is from Apple and Samsung, and they make phones obviously to the places that sell the most, which is big 4 operators on the high street, you know, selling to families and kind of offices. And so they design the phone to that use case, and they write the software to match that use case, and they also set up the phones kind of only to look at the radio spectrum that those operators say they're using, so they work really well, and they're really well tuned for our everyday usage, which is great, right? That's kind of what you'd want if you're a customer. But it means that if you're doing something innovative or different, then it's much harder to work with that, and private networks are quite new. So Apple are very good in this case. They have actually now standardized support for private networks, so we can get anyone that's got an iPhone 13 or newer online, which is easy. Android has been incredibly frustrating and very variable. And I think this will change now. The big 3 operators have got 5G standalone networks rolled out now. We do have most of those available in Bath, and those kind of settings will be adopted. But today, I will put up, I think someone was talking earlier about the QR code. I will put the QR code up at the end. You can try and connect your phone, but if you've got an Android phone, chances are it won't work. So we've talked about funding, we talked about the technology architecture, we talked about the handsets and the kit. This is my slide to make sure I stay on schedule. The next question is, what does good look like, and what are we trying to compete with? If we're going to do all this work, what do we want? So Ofcom goes around, Ofcom is the regulator for communications in this country. They go around the country and they look at what the right level of signal should be. And most people say that they get it wrong. And they kind of set the bar, I guess, too low. This is a negative number, so maybe it's too high. But they say that a good outdoor 4G signal is minus 105 dBm. So we have kind of tried to build a network that delivers at least that level of service. Most people would say that if you stand in Bath and you get minus 105 dBm, you probably still can't use it. But yeah, that's the threshold. So the question is, what operators in Bath are using at that level of frequency, which I think is, yeah, the red bit. So if you're red, then you're below 105. You know, who's going to give you the best service? So these are maps that are built from crowdsourced data. So people that have Android phones will likely be feeding back via Google and apps that they use the level of signal that they're receiving at any one time. And it all goes up into a big database. And it's anonymized, and then we can produce nice maps out of it. So on the left, we've got EE, and on the right, we've got 3. Particularly in Bath and largely around the country, EE and 3 share the same physical sites, although they put different equipment on them. So they'll have similar characteristics on the quality of their network. And you know, they both give a reasonably good service in Bath. They're the best ones that we've measured. But obviously the kind of that core centre of Bath is difficult to get to from anywhere. They're definitely the ones that have put the most infrastructure into the centre of Bath at the moment. If you look at O2 and you look at all frequencies on the left, so now the previous slide was just 5G, but this is now including 4G and 5G signals, O2 is okay, give you coverage. If you look at the number of people that stay on the O2 network, it's very different. Well, in 5G signals only, it's very different. So in my personal experience has been that O2's 5G coverage in Bath is particularly challenged. And I don't know if you can see the faint grey octagons on this picture. That's how faint they are. That's how few data points there are, in this data set at least, for good quality 5G service from O2. And so I know that's something they're trying to fix. We're trying to help them fix it. But fundamentally, it means they haven't got enough equipment deployed in Bath to deliver the level of service for the number of people they've got as customers. So if we now look again at the same thing for EE and we say, combine the 4G spectrum and the 5G spectrum, who gives the best result overall? The answer is probably EE. Sometimes it's 3, depending on who you are. Those two networks have great coverage, but also great capacity. But in order to deliver a good service around here, they rely on using kind of all of that toolbox and all the different types of technology to give you a good experience. So that's what we're trying to get to. The question is, can we beat EE? And it's been a hard challenge. So I mentioned we're deploying networks in different places, Cardiff in particular, as well as Bath. We've got 5 different technology focuses there. We've got a classic mobile network approach known as the 7.2 split, where the radio goes on the pole, a fibre cable goes from the pole back to a central office, in our case the Guildhall in Bath and Cardiff Market in Cardiff, and then there's software and processing done on the server. In Cardiff, we've got that same architecture on St Mary Street, but with a different vendor's software. But then in Cardiff, I don't know how good your Cardiff geography is, you have the stadium, you have St Mary Street, then you have Cardiff Market in the middle, and then you have Trinity Street. So in Trinity Street, we have a wireless mesh network. One of the problems of building networks in these areas is installing fibre, digging out roads, etc. That's all very difficult and expensive. So we looked at using a wireless network there to support the 5G. Then we've got the indoor networks in Bath. We've got the Bath Rugby and a little bit of the Roman Bars. We haven't done as much in the Roman Bars as we wanted to. And then we've done Cardiff Market. And then we've also done some outdoor pop-up events. And these all kind of drove a number of outcomes. The big question was, how do you deliver kind of unlimited wireless, ultra-fast 5G in that very high demand area? You know, if you think about the centre of Bath, when there's a rugby game on and a Christmas market and a Friday night, you can't walk from one side to the other. You know, that's a very stressful use case for a mobile phone network. and how could we actually deliver a good service in that environment. In Cardiff, they have obviously the same thing, but we wanted to understand different build technologies and different ways of doing it, and that's where we are testing out our energy management. Within the Bath Rugby, there's lots of interesting use cases around how do you kind of support safety and tourism and commerce and sell people beer when there's no mobile phone capacity to take a payment. And then the same in the pop-up networks and off-grid, and yeah, we had a busy summer last year. I'll show you some pictures in a minute. And then the final outcome, as I mentioned, was how do the vendors, bring their products to market. We talked a little about the QR codes at the end if you want to use it, but for SIM cards, we've been handing out real SIM cards, which we've had to make. We've also been handing out eSIMs so people can scan these and put them on their phones and get connected. And then we also have a set of test phones that people can use. And we've had several layers to the testing approach. One is we have a base load of people that use it every day. There's 20 to 30 people that walk around Bath, log in the morning, seem to use it. Similar in Cardiff. We've then done a lot of technical testing with handover and testing speed and testing load, and we've done some synthetic tests looking at video streaming and kind of loading traffic on the network. And then we've done a number of events. So we did the Bath Christmas markets, we've done the Shrewsbury, some things in there, and we did Cardiff Christmas market. So we kind of had different layers of testing and different types of people. But coming back to how we built it, we fundamentally had to build this infrastructure quite quickly across the kind of the west of the country. So we had, as I've mentioned, lots of equipment in the Guildhall, lots of equipment has gone into the Roman Baths, Bath Rugby Ground has been wired up, we have our lab in Newark Works, we have fibres that go around the city through the exchange. Then we have a cabinet in Shrewsbury, we have a network in Cardiff. There's been lots of holes dug and equipment installed, lots of men on cherry pickers, for which I apologise, and traffic jams that we've created. But ultimately in Bath, our initial plan was to deliver a high dense level of coverage across the kind of core bit of the city, through 15 or 16 cells. So you can see where we were kind of starting at the bottom of the railway station, up Manvers Street, around through the central kind of Orange Grove area, and then across into the Roman Baths, the Hot Bath Street areas, and up to Pulteney Bridge and Great Pulteney Street, and then down. So that's the kind of the core area we really wanted to cover. We have done a number of things to build this network, and one of which is employing a number of apprentices to help us build it, and they've been fantastic. We had a project where we very quickly had to get 13 different organizations working together on a bunch of technology. So we built a lab and a test environment in Newark Works, which is just across the river, if any of you have been there, where we set everything up and all the equipment and all the people, and everyone could come and go and work together. And that's kind of, that space has really helped us deliver the project, as well as kind of providing a whole bunch of training and learning opportunities for Ben and Ruben and for others. So that's been a great outcome from the project. In Shrewsbury, as I mentioned, the network is built. We have cells on the lampposts. I don't know if any of you have been to Quarry Park in Shrewsbury. It's very lovely when it's not flooded. But we have a cabinet there delivering fibre. And this is, they have a Shrewsbury Flower Show. They have all sorts of events over the summer. They have concerts and things. And they have really dreadful mobile phone coverage. So this network will hopefully give them connectivity and allow them to operate and sell. In Cardiff, we built the network in Cardiff, as I mentioned. One of the nice things in Cardiff was that we put the lights up outside the old big shop, and lots of people on Facebook went, "Oh, look, the council's put the new lights up, they're really pretty." These are not just ordinary lights, though. In this black bit at the top here, they do this for the online people as well. In this bit at the top, inside here, is hidden the 5G mesh network, and so they link between each other as they go all the way down the street. And so that then allows us to have a 5G layout that goes around and kind of broadcasts out the technology. But it's great because people can't really see it. So, and then we have the market hall, and we have the more traditional kind of deployment on St Mary's Street there. And then we have Bath. So in Bath, speed that a bit, shall we? We've replaced 15 lighting poles. You can imagine, being Bath residents, that this is not straightforward because Bath has special lighting poles that look nice and they cost more money. And so that was a whole learning journey. I sort of did know the council had a fibre network before I started this project. I didn't realise how much taxpayers' money they spent on it. And it's a very good network and lots of ducting everywhere. So they have a number of applications they run on it. Obviously, they've got their CCTV, they've got their security system, they've got their anti-terrorism bollards, they've got their clean air zone, they've got their city Wi-Fi, and now they've got a city-wide 5G network running on the same physical infrastructure. So that made our lives very easy and meant there was only a little bit of digging that had to be done to kind of put extra bits and pieces in the ground, which made it much more cheap and efficient. We've had a number of road closures. I'm particularly proud of this picture here in the bottom corner. There we go. Because this junction, as you will be familiar with, is kind of, as you come out past Mallory's and you go down to the front of the river, this is a major bus route in Bath. It was meant to be closed on a Sunday, but the contractors decided to do their work on a Thursday. So that went down well. We've done the Roman bars, we've done the rugby ground. And then in the Roman bars, as you can imagine, putting infrastructure in is very difficult. You have to consult, you have to have planning application. We've had 2 planning applications go through for this work. Had a little consultation with English Heritage. Everyone's happy in the end, but it's all just a lot of paperwork to get things done in Bath. So we got the network built. We had a number of problems where the installers, those of you that are familiar with fibre optic cables will know that there's meant to be a little blue clip on the end of this. And when we went to find out why it wasn't working, there wasn't a blue clip on the end of it. So we've had a number of sorts of situations where we had to go back and fix things and change things and sort that out. And then this is Hot Bath Street. Sometimes there's no alternative for getting a ladder out. In Christmas time, you can't bring a vehicle into the centre of Bath. So we can't get a cherry picker out to fix something, so we had to get a ladder out to fix something. So lots of challenges there, but they are all installed. And I've learned 2 things about Bath. One is I didn't realise how deep the lampposts go into the ground. You can see here on the lorry. Nor did I ever think I'd be hiring a lorry to get it taken away. So lampposts are really big and they go down really far. And then I must be one of the few lucky people that has been on the roof of the Roman bars by some very dodgy ladders, I have to say. But so that was a good view that people would like to see. So, but if you look carefully, you'll see a cell up there. So, having done the building of the network, then the question is how to test. It's fair to say that in this journey, the network hasn't been reliable enough at all times to want to have hundreds of people. When we started the project, we thought we'd get hundreds of people and we'd get them all to come into the centre and we'd give them all a phone and they'd use it. That actually probably wasn't going to work very well when we got to it. We've learned an awful lot of things about how to make the network more reliable. So we've ended up with 250 phones and trying to connect to these networks and simulating the traffic to start off with. And now we've probably got to a point where it's good enough that people can use it every day. But it's taken a lot of effort to find a way. I've got another good picture in a minute, actually on the next slide, to actually think. So this is my colleague Ben. We have a trolley with a solar panel and batteries, because the problem if you use your phones a lot, then they run out of battery really quickly. Inside the trolley is kind of 50 phones all lined up, all connected to the network, all streaming traffic, and eventually we got to good speeds. So if you've seen any of these little trolleys going around the city, that's what they were doing. And we have 4 of those. So that takes us to the current coverage footprint using similar colours. This is the network as it stands today. There's a couple more things to be switched on. The blue and the green and the orange bits are good quality signal. We've actually got a little bit further down Great Pulteney Street than we thought we would, which is nice. We have a bit of an issue here around the railway station, which we need to sort out. And we have a bit of an issue here going out to towards the sports centre that we need to sort out as well. But we have pretty good coverage, and then my colleagues at the back did some great job. Today, our target has been to get 250 phones and over a gigabit of traffic at any one time on the network. And you can see that they did that this afternoon. There are 250 phones here. So well done, Matt and everybody. Finally got there. Okay, so we've built a network, dug some holes, laid some pipes, built the fibers, tested it, got the software integrated, got some users on board, tested all the network. The next question, of course, is it safe? It's safe to use. And I want to absolutely and categorically refute anyone that tells you that 5G is not safe, because there are many studies done on this topic, much body of scientific evidence, and many respected people say that it's perfectly safe. Cellular mobile networks are safe. And I think one of the reasons why it's particularly safe and putting small cells up in Bath is about the amount of power that we're transmitting at. So if you have a big macro cell sat on top of a building, you're transmitting at 100 watts of power. We're transmitting at 5 watts for our street level cells, and they are, you would have seen, they're all placed above head height, they're quite a way off, sort of 2 to 3 or 4 meters up in the up above us. And then indoors, a Wi-Fi access point transmits a 1/4 of a watt, and we're transmitting as well at 1/4 of a watt. So we're doing that. The second thing is about the frequency. So the frequency that we're using is at 3.8 gigahertz, or 3,800 megahertz. So we're transmitting at a frequency that's below Wi-Fi access points and below microwaves. Our indoor stuff is using less power than a microwave. So we have less power and we have larger radio waves. And those two kind of factors together mean that our network is no worse than anything else that's there. So I think it's very important to look at the benefits of the network, because there is a lot of bad press sometimes about telecoms, and it's not all justified. We're going to skip over a couple of other kind of strands of the project. So not directly in Bath, but some of our partners have been working on this question of, well, how do you get good connectivity out in the rural areas? And if you run a festival in a muddy field, there are probably places where you can't drive a Land Rover and pop up a cell. And also, everyone will be familiar with Glastonbury and how well Glastonbury is served, and Vodafone comes along every year and they put up loads of big towers temporarily. There are then hundreds of other smaller festivals and cheese rolling events that don't get serviced, and they don't get the same level of attention that Glastonbury gets. And they're all crying out for selling things, because in those market towns, they're important to those vendors. So that's been an important strand of the project. And one of the partners has built this kind of completely self-sufficient off-grid bike. It's obviously solar-powered, battery-powered. It's got a 5G network on board. It can pretty much go anywhere. And the idea is that you wheel them up, wheel them out, and then you plug all the traders and the beer scents and the burger vans into them using the cell across the field, and they all get their good connectivity. And it uses a Starlink terminal to kind of bring the internet in down to the site. So it's a really clever innovation that's been developed as part of this program, and there was a series of 8 events over the summer in Worcestershire where they would pop up and they were served, and people were very happy. One of the examples was they have Busfest at the Malvern Showground, where they go along and they do a real-time conversion of a VW camper van. Now, only, 10, 20,000 people can get into Busfest, but the number of people that are interested in VW camper van conversions is in the hundreds of thousands of millions of people. So by being able to stream it, they could sell more tickets, and then that's kind of transformational for the Busfest people. But they've always needed a good quality internet connection and a wireless way of doing it in Malvern Showground, which now they have. So that was a great highlight this summer. And then there's also been, as I mentioned, 6 postdoc students working away in Lancaster, funded by this program, looking at how you would do power management on the mobile network. And there's this concept called an XApp, which is a bit of software that sits on the network and understands what's going on. And maybe all the people get off the railway station to come to the rugby ground, so you have a big, dense bunch of people using the network at the railway station, so you need to power up there. And then as they walk off the rugby ground, you could probably power down the railway station and power up the rugby ground. And you can move the load and the power around on the network. And if you can do that predictively and with artificial intelligence, then you start to have a network that's more optimal and more efficient for the world. So that's the kind of academic thread that's been in this network. And Tevia, as I mentioned, have developed this 5G Shift product. And this is very interesting because if you think about a building such as this one, or an office block, one of the problems with mobile phone networks, and you will have experienced this as you drive down the road, is you hand over from one cell to the other. And there's some probably interruption, or you've got a bit of a delay. If you're permanently wandering around an office, you want that to be as seamless as possible. So this uses what's known as a shared cell technology that they've developed in order that the whole building appears as one system. And so you can have maybe each floor as one system, and that means that you can walk around, get really good quality service indoors without kind of continually moving from A to B to C. So that's been another really interesting innovation that they're bringing to market. And so all of this technology that's been developed, all of this practice and proof points that we've seen, we've got to think about what are the use cases for it. So I've mentioned enterprise. Wi-Fi is great and it's cheap to deploy, but there's lots of situations where you might want better quality of service and you might want to pay for that, and the 5G is good for that because you've got that dedicated spectrum. We've had projects in healthcare and telehealth, and that's obviously an increasingly important thing in our society. One of the good use cases that we had in a project up in Liverpool that we were involved in was this idea of, can you have a remote consultation? And the problem is a doctor would want to see the quality of your skin. We can't do that on a normal video call, but if you have a 100 megapixel camera on a phone, you can get a really good view of your skin, and then you might not need to travel to see the relevant doctor. So that's another interesting thing. Security and wireless cameras and streaming and better coverage comes up everywhere. Everyone wants more CCTV. Theft is a real big problem in agriculture. So that's an area of interest. In entertainment, the rugby team are very keen to understand about rugby fans' journey into the ground. They know what happens when you get to the rec, but they don't know what happens before the rec. They want to understand what the feeling is in the city. Can they have kind of some live interviews, put it on the TV, those sorts of things. We've had applications about music concerts and virtual experiences. Lots of people are constrained by the amount of bandwidth they can have. If you ask the question, what could you put on if you had unlimited bandwidth, then it changes the kind of paradigm that people think about, and they think, well, I could have music and light shows, and we could all be outside, and you can have a different kind of entertainment experience. We've talked about tourism and commerce. We've done some things with augmented reality and virtual reality and kind of goggles. And then there's industrial use cases, robots and sensors. Many factories are all wired up because they need the stuff to work in really sensitive time. That means if you need to reconfigure your factory, you've got to move your machines, but then you've got a period of rewiring. That means you've got downtime and it's costly to stop your factory. So can you use wireless technologies and good quality wireless to make that more efficient? And then drone flying, long distance flights. At the moment, if you fly a drone, obviously you can only fly it within the line of sight. You have to be able to watch it. But what happens if you want to fly a drone beyond your line of sight? There's lots of reasons to do that. Obviously you might want to do that because you're dropping a bomb on someone else, but you might also want to do it because you're moving medicines. So there's a trial at the moment between Southampton and the Isle of Wight where they're flying drones backwards and forwards, bringing samples between the hospitals. To do that, you need a really good quality network. And the networks that we've built here in Bath and Cardiff in particular are big enough and cover an interesting enough area to justify some of those trials now. They're kind of useful enough to enable you to try those sorts of things. And then we did we had a really interesting use case at the Roman Bars. So we built a Centurion in conjunction with a Bath chemical rocket makers. And so this is an artificial intelligence Roman Centurion who knows quite a lot about 5G, and also he knows all about the Roman Bars because he's read the guidebook. You can have a natural language conversation with him. You can go backwards and forwards and ask him questions. You haven't got one with you, have you? No, should have bought one. Yeah. Come, we'll show you afterwards. But does he know about chain times? Yeah. It's really good. So the point about this and why is it different in 5G is that if you go to Rocket Maker's offices on Amber Street, they'll show you their tool, right? And it's really great. I don't know how many people of you have been to Bristol Airport and you've seen that annoying lady that just stands there on repeat telling you that you need to take your stuff out your bag. So they could do a better version of that, if that's what we need in the world. But you can imagine a virtual concierge as you come in to a restaurant or in a high density area as you get off the train. Lots of reasons why you might want to have a virtual person there helping people. But that so far has always been tethered to a computer or a wire or something like that. We've not been able to walk around the street and do that ad hoc. And so by taking the network and putting it on the handset, we're able to demonstrate that in a particular, different, in that kind of mobile use case, which then opens up the possibility of lots of other ways of you delivering kind of those things. And then, as I mentioned, the Christmas market, BANES will do some publicity about this. This is a sock vendor who was very happy that he could sell more socks. They have a real problem in Bath Christmas market in particular. If they don't take card payments, then they're cash only. People don't carry cash. And sorry? Okay, but on the, I regret that I don't, and I think increasing numbers of people don't. So if all of the mobile phone networks are jammed, they can't take a card payment, they say, I'm terribly sorry, you have to come back when you've got some cash. People don't come back, and they don't complete the purchases, so it costs them money. So by having better technology, better communications, they can sell more products, they get a better return on their Christmas market store. So that's been really good this year and helped a lot of them. So what next? Sadly, the DSIT funding will end, but the support for the network is going to carry on. The council will keep it operating, we will keep it operating, we will carry on looking at different use cases for it and kind of develop a joint business plan to help understand the justification for this network. And ultimately, we'd like to work with the big operators so that they use this infrastructure to improve their service. That's where we're ultimately trying to get to. We're working with the rugby stadium on some stadium use cases, as you mentioned, kind of health and safety things. The commerce and the tourism and the fan experience there could all be improved by having a dedicated network. And then we've got opportunities really for exploration. We are very interested to speak to more people that have more applications that would benefit from a network on this scale, where probably uniquely you can get access to it and you can customize it to your need, and you can, if you rang up EE and said, can I change this, they would say no. We have the ability to look at those sorts of things. And then, as I say, this has been an R&D test bed for a set of vendors, and they all want to carry on making their product better and demonstrating that it can work and work in different, more and more uses and more reasons why this technology can get better and be used. So those are the kind of the current things on our radar, which leads me then on to the general question, as promised in the advertising, of asking the question, why is coverage poor? And we've sort of alluded to some of these points in Bath, right? It's difficult to build networks here. There's not a lot of great sites. Those of you that live outside the city centre will be very aware that the mobile coverage is poor. And so, as we sort of looked on those graphs, the UK is mainly serviced by a fairly thin layer of mobile network. They have the spectrum in 800 and 900 megahertz. It's a very narrow channel. It has really great propagation. It travels miles. So you'll get a lot of coverage, but you won't get much capacity if you try and use it. And this is the problem, is that people will go to a festival in the field, it's been fine every day, everyone's walked their dog, they've kind of done their day-to-day tourism, you put 10,000 people there, there's not enough capacity. And as I say, one of the things is that not all operators are equal. There are two mast sharing partnerships in the UK. There's the Vodafone O2 one, there's the EE and 3 one. Obviously, 3 is about to merge with Vodafone, so I'm sure there'll be some big changes there. It's worth noting that EE has, well, probably the blessing and the curse of working on the Home Office Emergency Services Network. So they have more coverage, but according to geography, because they are mandated to do so, because ultimately ESM wants to cover everywhere. And then the other thing is that EE has invested in more spectrum than the other operators have, particularly per head. So O2, because it also runs a number of MVNOs like Sky and Leica, where there's many customers, they have much less spectrum per customer, whereas EE has more spectrum per customer. So fundamentally, this boils down to a commercial problem. Who wants to invest what money in which towns. Pretty much every region outside London is standing there going, pick me, pick me, pick me. And obviously Manchester and Birmingham and Glasgow and Edinburgh are next on the list, and then it filters out from there. So they invest when they think they've got a capacity issue, and that's mainly in cities and on special events. They don't invest, for the day-to-day coverage in villages and towns in this country. And as you know, this country is made up of probably thousands of little villages and towns. So it's an interesting economic problem. The other challenge is they don't have a business process for selling someone mobile coverage. You can't ring them up and say, I'd like to buy more coverage here, please, because I've got a business reason for it, or I'm a millionaire and I want to make phone calls on the beach, or any of those things. You can't do it. So even if you had the money, and sometimes people do have the money, you can't actually do it. So those sorts of two questions are interesting. I just wanted to highlight the other reason why is going back to the spectrums. This is a picture of who's got what spectrum. So at the bottom, everyone, as I mentioned, has got a thin layer of 800 megahertz spectrum, and then Vodafone and O2 from the original 2G networks have got this 900 megahertz spectrum, which they now use for 4G and 5G. And then EE and 3 use this band 3 spectrum, 1800 megahertz, of which they've got quite a lot. And then EE boosts capacity again with 100 megahertz of 2.6 spectrum. As you go further up the graph, the range on your spectrum gets shorter. So being in the middle and having lots of capacity in the middle is quite good for a town, because you might have 3 or 4 sites, you can deliver coverage over a few kilometers from each site, and you can deliver a big wide chunk of capacity. So E and 3 do a very good job there. Vodafone does a fairly good job, because they've got these kind of extra chunks here, and they deploy them. And then this is their 5G spectrum. And you can see that 3 has got 80 megahertz and 60 megahertz here. If you can get to the magic 100 megahertz bandwidth channel, then that's meant to be a really good gigabit speed on pure 5G. And as I said earlier, we're operating at 3.8, so we're above this, and we're using 100 megahertz of spectrum above that, because there's an allocation that Ofcom has called the shared spectrum that anyone can apply for. So the mobile networks have different levels of spectrum. So if you're sat in your village and you're annoyed about the fact you haven't got good mobile phone coverage, what can you do about it? And it is a difficult problem, and one that we put a lot of effort into solving. So the first thing is that the regions themselves are trying to become more mobile friendly. They're trying to become friendlier to operators. They're trying to become easier to work with. We have discovered during this process that if you want something done in Bath, then you need to know Colin in street lighting and Wayne in the fibre team and Rob in the business team. And they're all brilliant people. But if you're sat there in your office trying to roll out a national network, you probably don't have the time or energy to figure out who all the right people are in all of the right local authorities to get your network built. Not to mention, when you send them a planning application, it'll probably get rejected. You can sort of see why it's difficult for the mobile operators, and there's a lot of work the councils can do themselves to make that easier for them, and that process easier. And then the other thing that we can do is reduce cost. So it's fine in a big city to expect the operator to build it and foot the bill completely themselves, and rent the tower and put in the fibre network and all these things. As we get out into other areas, so for example, we mentioned that BANES has already invested a huge amount of taxpayers' money in security and ducting and infrastructure and CCTV. Why can't that infrastructure be then leveraged for these other utilities? And if the council can reduce the operating cost of running the network by leveraging an asset it's got, then probably that means that we can deliver coverage more cheaply, which is A, going to help the business case of putting the coverage out there, and B, will ultimately keep our bills down. So people need to start working together in these areas and try and look at where the cost savings are. And the councils that we've worked with are very active in thinking about that. Then there's a whole set of new efforts. So predominantly, the mobile networks have deployed big towers before, or rooftop sites. They're now starting to deploy small cells and ones that go on streets like we've shown today. Those are predominantly deployed for boosting capacity in a city centre at the moment. So you go to London, there's lots of them. But they also have an important role for boosting coverage and capacity in the many little dips and nooks and crannies in this country. And so we argue quite a lot that they should start using for those out, beyond just the big towers. There is a big investment in this country in fibre. So, as I've mentioned, there's a program called BDUK. I think £5 billion was the magic number that Boris announced. This money is being invested in building fibre networks. In Bath, we have TrueSpeed and City Fibre. These fibre networks cost less than the traditional kind of fibre solutions from BT. Those, again, reduce the operating costs. And then, finally, I guess there's a bit of leverage that can be used. So we've made a proposal to O2 to use the network in Bath, because that would be more cost effective than building their own network. But we and the council have said, at the same time, we need you to also invest in Midsummer Norton, Radstock, Keynsham and the Chew Valley, because those are important parts of North East Somerset, which also need coverage and capacity. So by saying, come to this authority, you can go for our kind of key golden site, but also please address the other sites, is a good conversation to have. And then finally, the industry is moving slowly towards this concept of a neutral host, which is where we'd like to play in the future, so that we can build the infrastructure for people, we understand our locality, we can develop it, and then we can rent it back to the operators and move away from this top-down approach to a more decentralised approach. And I'm pleased to say that in the west of England, the WECA started off with a digital office pilot. Part of this was there already, part of this has been funded by the programme, and the idea was to combine resources from across the west of England and say, how can we do this? Bristol has been quite successful in its deployment. What can we learn from that? How can we, can we have a single point of contact? Can we have a kind of streamlined processes? Can we have a standard template? Can we have a standard lead agreement? All these bits and pieces. Can we know where our assets are, and can we help people understand which streetlights they can use and which ones they can't? And as I mentioned in Bath, there are some streetlights that you can't replace because they don't know how to make them again. But there are other streetlights that are perfect for telecoms infrastructure. So it's about helping the operators kind of work through that. And I take no credit for this, but very recently that kind of pilot has become a permanent part of the West of England Combined Authority, and that digital office exists now and it's being funded centrally. And so hopefully things will carry on getting better for us, because there's a great little team of people there who are really trying to solve that problem. So this has been a very big and fast-paced programme. It's been very focused on technology, R&D, and generating proof points for the vendors that paid for it, and the academics and the local authorities that were part of it. It hasn't been able to tick all of the boxes around use cases and local usage and inclusion and kind of what the benefits are. But actually, I think that's where we can start now. The technology foundation is solid, and understand what the legacy can be of a network, a private network in a city, and carry on finding those reasons, because there must be more things in Bath than just the Christmas market that need high bandwidth networks, and we're very keen to find them. So please tell your friends that are not here tonight. So that's kind of where we've got to. If you want to get involved, Bath and North East Somerset Council has a 5G testbed sign up. You can WhatsApp us. If you've got a modern iPhone, you can scan this QR code. And then finally, a quick plug. If you want to buy a SIM on the best network in Bath, supported by a local team, you can please come and buy one from us after that. So thank you very much, and hopefully that was interesting for you.
Well, I think that was the most technically dense talk I've come to here for a while, to be honest. So my head is steaming. So I'd like to open the floor to any questions, if anybody has any. Okay, I'll start with you and then I'll come to you. So if you can use
Yeah, sure, thanks. What are the prospects for national roaming where just using my ordinary SIM I can walk into the middle of Bath and enjoy the faster network?
The prospect of being able to use your existing SIM on this network is probably zero. I think that the big operators are a few years away from supporting the right bits of technology. they are now doing 5G standalone on some of their higher end price points, but not all of them. And then they have zero appetite for what you use the word roaming, i.e. where their SIM can connect to another person's network in the UK.
Yeah, I'm just looking for a nice, easy way.
Yeah, no, we all completely agree, it would be great. So the thing that's most likely to happen is that these cells will get adopted as part of their networks and will start transmitting a Vodafone or an O2 or an EE signal as well. And then you'll see it seamlessly. Probably O2 is the furthest ahead in that conversation. I'm sure if EE was here, they would say they didn't actually have a problem in Bath and what we talked about. And to be fair, most of the time they don't.
How long is the network staying up?
Well, we built it in such a way it doesn't cost the council very much money at all to run. So I believe their intention is to keep it running for as long as they can.
Yeah. Cool. Is there any prospects of this technology being used on poles that are for wired broadband? I mean, you mentioned
like fixed wireless access.
Operators. They've also Virgin has just done Camden, and it seems a crying shame to have to put cables from the pole to the house.
Yeah, I think cellular will always have less capacity than fibre, so it's probably worth the investment if you're building fibre networks to, do that. But certainly, wireless has a good use of what we call fixed wireless access. There is a valid use for that, absolutely. And I think one of the challenges that we identified in Liverpool, my friend Frank is here, is that particularly in social housing, you get people that are not resident for long enough to take out a contract or something with a main operator on a fibre cable, and those people, being connected is still really important for them because that's how they access, all the kind of training, education, and benefits. So there's a good role here for a kind of municipal wireless network to support those kind of houses. And this network has been fairly well built to cover the ones in the centre of town, excepting there's quite a lot of social housing outside of Bath.
You mentioned that it was essentially a commercial problem in terms of investment by telcos, but is it not fair to say that in Bath it's almost entirely a council problem or a planning problem? I'm sure you're familiar with the Larkhall mast that was refused and made the national press, both on a small number of residents having very strong anti-health views and also a wider number of residents having the view that there are no more mobile phones in George and Bath, so there should never be any.
Yeah.
How much is that a problem?
I think it is a problem. I think so two things to say. So one is, under the planning laws, you're not allowed to object to those sorts of infrastructure for health reasons. And I don't feel it's helpful that our MP tried to do that. So they don't officially object under health reasons, they come up with other reasons. In Bath, the visual amenity is the obvious one to go to. But, I mean, we had this conversation, and I would say that how many people in this audience have spotted the black cells on the street lights in Bath? One. Good. Two. So most people don't wander, apart from me, most people don't wander around with their head in the sky. People don't see it and it blends in. So yeah, I think that the city, we could do a lot more to encourage that investment, because I think that, as has been explained to me, if you're sat at your desk in operator land and you've got 100 counties to work with, and this one keeps being rejected, you'll probably move on to the next one. So that is definitely a big issue. But then it comes back to investment. So, O2 is on record as saying they need to invest in Bath. Question number one is, how do they do it? But question number two is, why are they just investing in Bath, where they probably do have a commercial reason to do that, but they're not investing in Keynsham and Midsummer Norton and Radstock, where they still have service level opportunities to improve. So I think they, they need to look at it a bit more in a package at the same time as the relevant authority needs to make it easier for them to do so.
My second kind of question, somewhat related, is there are parts of Bath, including where I live, where there's no good 4G reception by any of the providers. But all the use cases for 5G, absolutely fantastic.
Yeah.
For those of us that can't even get 4G, it's not directed at you, but where's the trade-off? 5G would be great, but actually I prefer 4G if I have to choose.
So I think that it's worth saying, it comes back to the spectrum picture. So your problem is that even at this very low bandwidth of spectrum, you're not receiving a signal. Now, the clever people at Ericsson have set up their radios so that they will transmit to you 4G or 5G or 5G standalone, depending on what your device supports, in that same bit of spectrum. Okay, so you will get a different experience to that I will get because we'll have different devices. So it's not about whether it's 4G or 5G, and I would actually say that a 5G, you will get on the same spectrum and the same channel, you will get better performance with a 5G standalone service than you will do with a 4G service. So you probably do want 5G if you could get it, but that's a different question to why am I just not getting blanketed with enough spectrum? And that's probably because of where you are in Bath and there's too many hills and not enough towers. So, yeah.
Any other questions in the room? And then we'll move to the online question.
Yeah, online questions. I can see there's two.
You're explaining about how you had provided coverage in the middle of Bath, but explain how it's like a street trader. How do they go about using it, and how much does it cost them?
Well, at the moment it's free, although probably we need to charge them. So what we did in the Christmas market, I don't know if it's in the picture. It's not in the picture. In the Christmas market, we gave them all Wi-Fi routers that sat in the back of the sheds in Bath and Cardiff. And so they had Wi-Fi, which they were familiar with using, but then it used 5G as the network. For some of them, you can have a second SIM. So the iPhones particularly do a really good job of supporting a second SIM card, and then they'd be on both networks at the same time, and they could take payment through their phones. So
the street market, they're like a Wi-Fi router with a mobile SIM in the back. Sort of.
Yeah.
And effectively, your sponsorship and the council's investment, you're paying for that.
Yeah. Next year, then we'll probably need to charge them 50 quid or something, but we haven't quite got to that.
Okay, we'll go to the online question.
Yeah, just one question online. Question for Peter. You appeared unconvinced when telling us 5G technology is safe. Where can consumers find independent scientific study to evidence this?
Well, I think I'd refer you to the BBC articles, but apparently the American Secretary of Defense came over to Europe today and he said categorically, I want you to understand that America will not protect Europe anymore, and I want to use the same level of gravitas to emphasize how safe 5G is.
Okay, but your answer was go to the BBC website.
Yeah, and World Health Authority and Mobile UK, which is the trade association for the UK operators, has quite a lot of stuff on 5G safety.
Okay, any other questions in the room? If not, I'll move to one of mine. Sorry.
But just, you talked a little bit about where your business goes next. So and being a sort of neutral platform that people rent from, just sort of interested in where you see your business in, say, 5 years' time.
I don't know if we've quite got that far, but we are, so the big, coming back to my quadrant of where's 5G useful, the place today that people will pay for it is typically holiday parks and, you know, kind of caravan sites and mobile home sites, because those sites are not connected and they've been bypassed by all the government broadband schemes. So back to your point about broadband, so we can put a 5G cell in there and we can sell them £38 a month service. If anyone knows anyone, let me please come up, tell me. That's what we do day to day commercially. And then we're starting to look at factories and stadiums and those sorts of clients that would have that need. But as I mentioned, every other conversation is, but can I not please just have some better mobile phone signal to make a phone call? So the question is then, how can you also, at the same time as deploying a private 5G network, deploy a public one?
Okay, so my question, which might be a dumb one, is how does Starlink sit above this or around it, or are they broadly the same application?
Yeah, so I don't understand how Starlink works either, but the way that we frame it is that Starlink is about bringing an internet connection down to a site, whereas 5G is all about broadcasting it out. So our vehicle uses Starlink because it will turn up in the middle of the field, it will get an internet connection out of the sky, and then it will broadcast that out around the traders. And you might say, but surely everyone needs just to have Starlink in the world. The problem with that is that there's not enough capacity, particularly in terms of there's not enough satellites and can never be enough satellites that can be put up in the sky to deliver enough Starlink terminals on the ground to support everybody. So that would be problem number one. And then problem number two is it uses more energy. It's quite energy inefficient and currently more expensive, although that's just a pricing thing. And if you're in the south of England at the moment, Starlink's not available because everyone's already bought Starlink. So we did a Welsh valley called the Clanthony Valley, just north of Abergavenny, where indeed a number of people do have Starlink because they had nothing before. But they couldn't, all 122 houses in that valley couldn't have Starlink because there's not enough Starlink capacity to deliver every house. So 5G base stations is cheaper and faster.
Yeah. And who wants to be tied to Mr. Musk anyway?
Other operators are available. So.
Okay, I think, there's one question over here, yes. One last.
Okay, right. Have I understood it properly? Is 5G, the deployment of 5G dependent on satellites?
No, 5G, deployment 5G is much more about fibre in the ground than satellites from the sky.
Thank you. Thanks.
Okay, I think in that case we've reached the end of the evening, so I'd just like to suggest we give Peter one last round of thanks.
Thank you very much.